Over the centuries, foolhardy travellers have drowned here. In the 1790s, two young artists came here in search of inspiration. One would live to enjoy fame and fortune, while the other would die young and be forgotten. Together, their genius would change the face of British landscape painting forever. Their names, William Turner and Thomas Girtin. Girtin was the first to come here. It was 1796. He was 21 years old. He'd just finished an apprenticeship in London. Girtin had been tutored in the strict artistic rules of the day. Stifled by convention, he travelled north to find freedom and fresh inspiration in the wild scenery of Northumberland. Girtin was a rebel, a natural breaker of rules. He thought that the traditional teaching on how you should draw and paint was cold and unfeeling. He didn't want to draw every precise little detail of what he saw. Instead, he wanted to give an impression of how he felt about the landscape. And so, he insisted on painting in the open air, in a vantage point here, and worked obsessively until he'd captured the mood of this place. Girtin's epic painting shows man dwarfed by the immensity of the landscape. He's not attempting a precise reproduction of the scene before him, but a vision of it, shaped by his own feelings. He's exaggerated the height of the rocky outcrop. Detail is abandoned for loose, dramatic brushstrokes. When it was exhibited, some people said his style was lazy, even that it was unfinished. But others said Girtin burst like a meteor upon the public. Within weeks of seeing Girtin's painting, William Turner set off for Lindisfarne, determined to outdo his friend and rival. It would be the first of many trips north. In this wild landscape, Turner gave full rein to his emotions. A storm is brewing. Dark clouds threaten to envelop the sunlit scene. The turbulent North Sea swells and crashes, battering the island. In the foreground, travellers struggle ashore. Again, nature towers over mankind. Girtin and Turner came to define the golden age of landscape art. But while Turner's career brought him fame and fortune, Girtin's was tragically cut short. Painting outside in all weathers, he succumbed to asthma and died just 27 years old. But in his short life, Girtin painted some of the most powerful pictures of the North. An inspiration to other painters, even if forgotten by the world. I was a teenager when I first saw a Thomas Girtin watercolour. It was for sale for a fraction of what it'd be worth today because he wasn't particularly fashionable. I rather wish I'd bought it. But Girtin seems to have fallen through the net of history, and yet when he died, many people ranked him above Turner. Turner himself, at the peak of his fame, said, "If Tom Girtin had lived, I should have starved." heading into Yorkshire, what the Yorkshire people call God's own country. And as far as I know, the only county that claims its own national anthem on Ilkley Moor, Bartat. According to tradition, the song was conceived here at the Cow and Calf Rocks on Ilkley Moor. If this is Yorkshire's national anthem, then brass bands are Yorkshire's national music. On Ilkley Moor, Bartat. I never understood what it means. This bloke on the moors without his hat on. Doesn't seem to make much of a song. Is there something about the landscape of Yorkshire and the look of Yorkshire, do you think, that affects the people who live here and the music you play?
Perhaps the weather. It's quite cold. It's certainly cold up here today, and we haven't got hats on, as you've noticed.
I think it must have because there's such a variety of countryside in Yorkshire.
Yeah.
From the plains of York being flat to the moors over beside, or if you get, like here, around here, the Pennines, you're on the backbone of England. And if you live and are born and bred in the backbone of England, the backbone of anything is the main part, isn't it?
Yes.
Hard?
Yes, I would say it's hard because of the industries that people have to work in, stone quarry and coal mining, textiles. I always think that it's perhaps northern men are reluctant to show their emotions. And I think all your emotions can come out in your music, and you can continue to be, not soft, but a Yorkshireman.
What is it to be a Yorkshireman?
What is it to be a Yorkshireman? Well, to be born in God's own county, there's nothing better, is there? You can't claim to be a Yorkshireman, can you?
I'm from East Sheen.
Exactly.
West London.
Exactly. That's not God's county, is it?
It is to me. I'm walking along the Craven Fault, a 22-mile geological gash in the landscape, which runs from the borders of Cumbria into the Yorkshire Dales. At the northern end of this great limestone gorge is one of the most spectacular sights in Britain. Wow. This is the famous Goredale Scar. Somewhere around 50, maybe 60 million years old. Used to have a great roof to it, so now these are like the walls of a crumbling building, but on a massive scale, over 300 feet or something like that, water plunging down the middle. It used to make people think, when they stood here where I'm standing, that the sides were going to fall down any moment, collapse on top of them. People came here wanting to be awestruck, to experience a landscape that had the power to inspire terror. The poet Thomas Gray said he could only bear to stay here for a quarter of an hour, and even then, not without shuddering. You'd think this place would be an absolute gift to the artist. These great overpowering rocks, the whole scale of it. But the funny thing is, they all thought it was unpaintable, almost too majestic to be compressed into a canvas, until one person proved them wrong. His name was James Ward, and in 1812 he transformed the unpaintable into a triumph of landscape art. Ward captured the sight that so terrified his fellow painters in a monumental picture, 12 feet high, 14 feet wide. Ward rearranged elements of Goredale Scar to provoke the strongest emotional response. Beneath a sky turbulent with storm clouds, he increased its scale, deepening and darkening the chasm. He moved the waterfall into the center to provide a glimmer of light in the darkness, and added a herd of cows and deer emerging from the depths of the cavern, dominated by a great white bull in the foreground. The painting proved overwhelming in more ways than one. Ward's masterpiece was too large to hang in the home of Lord Ribblesdale, his patron. It ended up in the British Museum, and they couldn't find anywhere to put it either, and so for nearly 30 years it was rolled up and left in a dank cellar. To Ward's fury, the picture wasn't exhibited in his lifetime. It was 20 years after his death before it was finally hung on the walls of the National Gallery. The problem with landscape that could thrill and terrify the tourist was that it took such an effort to get to. There were a growing number of visitors in the early 1800s who wanted something a little less strenuous. Many of them found their way to the town of Knaresborough, in the gorge of the River Nid. A trip to Knaresborough was a package tour of the picturesque. All that fashionable fell walking and crag climbing was dirty and wet and cold and possibly dangerous. But if you wanted to experience the excitement of the romantic vision, then you could come here. You could say this is where the unruly spirit of romanticism was tamed. Knaresborough was the romantic north in miniature. It had all the picturesque favourites: a tumbling weir, a river shaded by trees, a craggy gorge, the ruins of an ancient castle. And it even had a cave reputed once to have been home to a local witch. Well, oh, that was about. In the 19th century, Knaresborough was a romantic theme park, perfect for those who preferred their nature a little less savage. The biggest lure was the dropping well, where as though by magic, everyday objects would be turned to stone. So what's actually happening? It's just water dripping down on them.
That's right.
And it turns them to stone.
It's the mineral content of the water.
Really?
Yeah.
And they're really hard when they're finished, don't they?
They are very hard, yeah.
But it's not just teddy bears, you've got a baseball glove.
A glove,
handbag.
a handbag.
Whose
That was
that?
Agatha Christie's handbag.
No.
It
Go on.
was, yeah.
Go on with you.
It was.
Was it?
Truly, truly. So they used to walk to the top of the well
Yeah.
and hang things over. And in 1853, it was a couple on the way to York races. And they hung a top hat and a lady's bonnet and they never collected them, never came back for them, and they're still there now.
They're enormous, that one. It's
It is,
vast.
yes it is.
And that's meant to be a top hat.
That's a top hat, and the one on the right is the bonnet, the lady's bonnet.
But they've been there 130 years or so.
I'll take your word for that, yeah.
Something like that. I can't do the maths either. I've got a glove. I lost the other one. So
Okay.
I've got one glove, which I can sacrifice to the
Right,
well.
okay. Nice one.
There we are. Seems safe. Come back in 6 months. Heading southwest, I'm entering Bronte country. Through the snowy waste, across the blasted heath, one. Ah! He drove his I love it on top of the moors. You feel more free, I think, on these hills than in real mountains, which are always sort of lowering over you. Here, you really are on top of the world. It makes your spirit soar. I wish I were out of doors, half savage and hardy and free, and laughing at injuries, not maddening under them. I'm sure I should be myself were I once among the heather on those hills. Emily Bronte's story of the tragic love affair between Catherine Earnshaw and the brooding hero Heathcliff would change the way we feel about the Yorkshire moors forever. This great outcrop of rock is known in Wuthering Heights as Penistone Crag. It's the secret meeting place of Cathy and Heathcliff. And this is the Fairy Cave. Legend has it that if you crawl through here, you'll be married within a year. Well, I'm already married, and luckily, I don't think I could get through it if I tried. Wuthering Heights shocked Victorian readers with its violent and passionate portrayal of love. Yet Emily Bronte was a shy young woman who led a sheltered life and never married. Like all the artists and writers who opened our eyes to the wild beauty of the North, she found a special kind of freedom in this landscape. It must have been wandering on these moors that inspired Emily's imagination, led to that passionate and emotional writing. Her elder sister Charlotte understood it. She wrote once that Emily loved the moors. Out of a sullen hollow on a livid hillside, she said, Emily could make an Eden.
Join David Dimbleby next week when he'll be travelling through Constable country, exploring the meadows and woodlands of Suffolk, floating above the fens, and sailing the Norfolk Broads.
Well, it's a 1:30 start for today.